Imagine getting like exactly what you've wanted your entire life, and your first physical reaction isn't joy at all. It's just sheer suffocating panic.
Right, which is so counterintuitive.
Totally. I mean, think about it for a second. You get this massive promotion you've been grinding toward for, what, 5 years? And instead of popping champagne, your chest tightens, and you secretly just want to quit.
Yeah, or you finally meet someone who's genuinely kind, someone emotionally steady, completely available.
Oh, man. Yeah. And instead of feeling safe, you feel deeply suspicious.
Exactly. You feel suffocated.
Right. You start actively looking for flaws, like almost trying to provoke a fight just to break the tension. You're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. So the question we're really exploring today in this deep dive is this crazy paradox. It sits in the center of so many ruined relationships and blown
Oh, it
opportunities.
really does.
Why does a genuinely good thing so often feel like a terrifying threat? You know, why do we fear the good?
Well, I mean, it's arguably one of the most frustrating human experiences out there,
Mm,
primarily because it feels so irrational.
right.
We're taught to pursue happiness, stability, success. Like, they're these ultimate, uncomplicated rewards.
Yeah.
But when you actually get them and you find yourself, entirely unable to enjoy them, well, the immediate assumption society makes and that we make about ourselves is that there's something fundamentally wrong with our character.
Yeah, we just think we're broken
Yeah.
or like ungrateful or inherently self-destructive.
Which is such a heavy, paralyzing burden to carry. But our mission today is to completely strip away that moral judgment.
Thank goodness.
Right. We're going to look at this compelling stack of sources covering attachment theory, intergenerational trauma, cybernetics, and sociology. And the goal is to unpack the unflinching science of inherited capacity.
And just to be clear, we are not talking about like life hacks or positive thinking today.
No, definitely not.
We're looking at the deep biological reality of how our nervous systems are formed. And, more importantly, what happens when those deeply formed systems literally collide with a reality they were never designed to handle.
Because the baseline assumption we have to challenge right away is that human beings are just these empty vessels, walking around waiting to be filled with good or bad experiences.
It just isn't true.
No, it's not. If you pour pure, clean water into a shattered glass, the water is still going to spill everywhere. And, it's not the water's fault, but it's also not because the glass is morally bad. It's a structural issue.
Right.
We encounter reality through structures and histories that have already been trained, often decades before we were even born, to expect a very specific kind of world.
And honestly, making those invisible structures visible, it just offers this profound kind of relief.
Yeah.
When you finally understand the mechanics of why you react the way you do, you can stop treating your anxiety as a character flaw.
Exactly. You start treating it as a physiological mismatch. But to begin, we really have to establish what the sources call inherited relational capacity.
Yeah, let's dive into that, because when I hear the word inherited, my mind instantly goes to genetics, like eye color, height, maybe predisposition for heart disease.
Sure, the standard biological inheritance.
Right, or even behavioral stuff, like watching your parents argue and then just mimicking their argument style. But the adult intimacy research and attachment theory in our sources, it points to something way more visceral. It's not just about what we observe. It's about what is physically constructed inside of us.
That distinction is so paramount. Let's really look at the biological reality here. Adult attachment research shows that early caregiving doesn't just teach a child abstract concepts about love or safety.
It's not a cognitive lesson.
No, not at all. A chaotic environment doesn't just give a child a negative opinion of relationships. Early caregiving is the architect of the body's practical, biological capacity to recognize, tolerate, and sustain connection. It builds the literal neural pathways.
Wow. So it's a physical infrastructure.
Yes, the exact same biological system that governs an infant's survival bond with a caregiver is the system that governs our emotionally intimate adult bonds. It dictates the release of stress hormones, the activation of the amygdala, the regulation of the autonomic nervous system.
Everything.
Everything. So if a child's early environment is full of chaos or unpredictable affection or emotional absence, their developing nervous system doesn't just passively experience that, it adapts to it.
It builds a biological capacity specifically designed to survive chaos.
Exactly. Meaning the brain becomes highly efficient at detecting threats, managing adrenaline spikes, expecting betrayal.
And crucially, it doesn't build the neural pathways required to process peace.
Right, because in a chaotic environment, stability is irrelevant to survival. In fact, lowering your guard to enjoy peace when you're in a dangerous environment, that's a huge liability.
Okay, that makes total sense on a developmental level for, an individual. But the sources push this even further, like into intergenerational territory, which is wild.
It really is.
I was reading through the review by Rachel Yehuda and Amy Lerner on intergenerational trauma, and the mechanisms they describe are just staggering. We aren't just talking about a child adapting to their immediate parents. We're talking about adapting to trauma of their grandparents.
Yeah, Yehuda and Lerner's work on the transmission of trauma effects is a watershed moment in how we understand human capacity. They explore how the physiological impacts of severe trauma like extreme stress responses, altered cortisol levels, can literally be transmitted across generations.
Through, complex biological and psychological pathways.
Exactly, and prominently that includes epigenetic mechanisms.
Okay, I want to pause and spend some time on this because epigenetics is a term that gets thrown around so much in pop science.
Oh, absolutely, and often incorrectly.
Right. So what is the actual physical mechanism happening there?
Well, to put it simply, epigenetics is the study of how environmental factors can change how your genes are expressed without actually altering the underlying DNA sequence itself. Think of your DNA as the master blueprint for a house. Every cell has the entire blueprint. But epigenetic markers, things like DNA methylation, they act as highlighters or black markers on that blueprint. They tell a specific cell, read this section, but completely ignore that section.
So the genes themselves don't change, but the instructions on how to use them do.
Correct. And what researchers are finding is that severe, sustained trauma can cause epigenetic changes that alter how a person's stress response system functions, specifically the HPA axis, which controls cortisol production.
Wow.
So if someone survives a famine, a war, or severe systemic abuse, their body alters gene expression to maintain a constant state of hypervigilance. The groundbreaking and honestly somewhat chilling part of Yehuda's research is that these epigenetic markers can potentially be passed down to offspring.
So a child could be born with a nervous system that is already biologically tuned to expect a war zone.
Yes.
Even if they're born into a perfectly safe, comfortable suburb,
Yes.
they inherit a baseline expectation of danger before they've ever experienced a single dangerous event.
They inherit the capacity to handle extreme stress, but they might completely lack the capacity to handle ordinary, quiet life. Their body is just flooded with stress hormones at the slightest provocation, or even when there's no provocation at all, because their biological baseline was set by an environment they never personally lived through.
That is just, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of an analogy. Okay, let's unpack this. It's like trying to run a massive, incredibly complex, modern software program, let's say a high-speed video editing suite, on a computer built in the 1990s.
I like this.
Right. The software itself is fantastic. The software is the loving partner, the stable job, the beautiful home. There's nothing wrong with the software.
Yeah.
But when you try to install it, the 1990s hardware literally cannot process the data.
The motherboard heats up.
Yeah. The fan starts screaming and the whole system crashes. It's a hardware issue. But this raises a huge question for you, the listener. If you were running on inherited, outdated hardware, does this mean you're biologically doomed? Like, are we just destined to crash every time something good tries to install itself in our lives?
No, you are absolutely not doomed. And that is a crucial point to anchor on here. The brain is neuroplastic. Epigenetic markers can be modified. Capacity can be built over time.
Okay, good. That's a relief.
But, and this is the absolute prerequisite for any kind of change, you cannot upgrade the hardware until you accurately diagnose the specifications of the machine you're currently running. You have to acknowledge what the sources call the condition capacity mismatch.
The condition capacity mismatch, let's really define that.
It's the conflict that happens when an external condition, even an objectively positive one, exceeds a person's internal capacity to hold it, process it, or regulate it.
Right.
Think about it. We spend so much time in our culture trying to improve our external conditions. We want better jobs, better partners, more money. We focus entirely on acquiring the good thing, but we almost never examine whether we possess the physiological and psychological capacity to actually tolerate that good thing once it arrives.
Because if the capacity isn't there, the body literally treats the good thing as an attack. Like, if a person was raised in an environment where affection always came with a hidden cost, where love was always a precursor to manipulation or violence, and suddenly they're offered affection with absolutely no strings attached, their nervous system does not say, oh, wonderful, a pure gift.
It can't say that
Yeah.
because it has no biological precedent for a pure gift. The nervous system says, danger, the pattern is broken, where's the catch?
It's listening for the turn.
Yes. The body literally listens for the turn. It searches for the hidden threat because that is the baseline it was trained to survive. The anxiety isn't a malfunction. It's a highly effective, incredibly sophisticated survival mechanism. It's just operating in the wrong environment.
That reframing is just huge. The anxiety is your body trying to protect you based on outdated data. And this condition capacity mismatch perfectly explains why steady, reliable love can feel so incredibly disturbing to someone who's used to chaos. The sources point out that steady love might actually be experienced as, like, pressure or boredom or a deep sense of unreality.
Boredom is a very common and honestly very confusing manifestation of this.
How so?
Well, if your nervous system equates love with high-stakes drama, constant rescue missions, and massive spikes of adrenaline and cortisol, that becomes your biochemical definition of connection. So when you meet a partner who consistently shows up, communicates rationally, respects your boundaries, and, just does the dishes.
Your nervous system doesn't register any adrenaline.
Right. The body says, there is no chemical spike here, therefore this person must not care about me. The peace feels empty, it feels dead. So what does the person do? They unconsciously introduce a disturbance.
They pick a fight over nothing.
Exactly. They pull away just to see if the partner will chase them. They manufacture a crisis to generate the familiar biochemical cocktail that their body recognizes as love.
Which brings us back to the hardware analogy, but honestly, I think there's an even better way to look at this, a more biological metaphor. This isn't just outdated machinery, this is like an autoimmune disease of the psyche.
Oh, that's an exceptionally accurate way to frame it.
Right. In a physical autoimmune disease, the body's defense system is so hypervigilant, so aggressive, that when a harmless, safe substance enters the body like pollen, or even the body's own healthy tissue, the immune system attacks it. It mounts a massive destructive defense against something that was never a threat to begin with.
Yes, you're having an allergic reaction to peace. You are mounting a full-scale immune response against a healthy relationship because your system misidentifies safety as a vulnerability. The good is just an unmanageable new condition.
Okay, I can see how a chaotic childhood or inherited trauma ruins a peaceful romance. Human emotions are messy, and attachment is inherently subjective. But surely this condition capacity mismatch doesn't apply to, like, objective mathematical things, like money. A dollar is a dollar, right?
That's the logical assumption, yeah. But the research proves otherwise. The exact same biological and systemic architecture applies to finance. And it's beautifully illustrated in the scarcity research summarized by the American Psychological Association.
Specifically looking at the work of Eldar Shafir, right?
Yes, behavioral economist Eldar Shafir.
His work on scarcity completely shifts how we view poverty. Because usually society views poverty simply as a lack of resources. It's a math problem. You have less money than you need. End of story.
But Shafir and his colleagues demonstrate that poverty is not just a physical state of lacking resources, it's a profound cognitive condition. Scarcity fundamentally alters how the brain functions. They use this concept of a bandwidth tax.
The bandwidth tax, meaning your brain only has so much processing power.
Precisely. If you are constantly doing the desperate mental math of survival, if I buy this gallon of milk, I'll be $4 short for the electric bill, which means they might cut the power, which means the food in the fridge will spoil. Your brain is operating under an immense chronic cognitive load.
Right. It's consuming massive amounts of mental bandwidth just to survive the next 24 hours.
Yes. And Shafir's research shows that this chronic tax can actually lower a person's effective IQ by up to 13 points, which is roughly equivalent to the cognitive loss you suffer after a full night without sleep.
So your brain physically forces you into a state of tunneling. You can only see the immediate crisis directly in front of you. You literally do not have the cognitive bandwidth to see the periphery, to plan for the long term, or to weigh complex abstract risks.
Because planning for next year is a luxury your brain cannot afford when it's desperately trying to survive Tuesday.
Wow.
Now, apply the condition capacity mismatch to this. What happens when a nervous system formed entirely by the tunneling of scarcity suddenly receives a financial windfall, say an unexpected $30,000 inheritance?
Well, the standard societal judgment is incredibly harsh here. Society says, great, you have money now. You should immediately invest it in an index fund, build a 6-month emergency savings account, and secure your future. And when the person doesn't do that, society labels them irresponsible, or foolish, or structurally incapable of wealth.
But the reality is a sheer mismatch of scale. If your entire life, and potentially the lives of your parents and grandparents, has taught your nervous system that money is inherently fleeting, that any surplus will inevitably be wiped out by a medical emergency or a broken down car or a predatory fee, your biology dictates a very specific response to that 30 grand.
The nervous system says, this resource will not last. It is unsafe to hold on to it. If I leave it in a bank, it will be taken from me.
Exactly. So the body seeks immediate regulation. It dictates that the person spend the money instantly to achieve immediate, tangible relief from the chronic stress. Or they buy physical assets that can't be easily confiscated by an unexpected bill like a car, or luxury goods that offer an immediate psychological boost in social standing.
Because they haven't been formed to handle the scale of long-term financial structure.
Right. The money arrives, but the physical and cognitive capacity to hold that money as a multi-decade tool just doesn't exist.
And it isn't just money or relationships either. It's the concept of success itself. The sources reference Martina Horner's academic work on the fear of success, which I found absolutely fascinating because we are culturally obsessed with the fear of failure.
Oh, endlessly.
We talk all the time about overcoming the fear of failure, but Horner points out that success introduces a terrifying amount of unmanageable new conditions.
We assume success is purely a reward, just a static state of victory. But structurally, success is an intense environmental disruption. When you succeed, you become highly visible. Visibility attracts scrutiny, expectation, and the possibility of harsh judgment from peers.
Right, and it often requires a massive shift in personal identity. You're no longer the underdog, you're the authority, which alienates you from your previous peer group.
You suffer a social penalty for succeeding. And perhaps most terrifyingly, success introduces the reality of having something monumental to lose. If you're at the bottom, you can't fall. If you reach the top, every single day is a battle against the gravitational pull of failure.
I really want to dig into that specific feeling, because here's where it gets really interesting, but also confusing. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who just launched a wildly successful company or got a massive book deal. Is the fear actually about the good thing itself? Do I fear the book deal, or am I just terrified of the inevitable moment when it all falls apart? I mean, is it the fear of the good or the fear of losing the good once I finally have it?
It's both, but fundamentally it's the fear of the scale of the loss, which stems directly from an inability to receive the good at the scale it's being offered.
Okay, unpack that.
It's not just that you fear losing the book deal, it's that being a successful author requires a level of identity capacity, a tolerance for public critique, a management of complex schedules, a restructuring of your self-worth that you just haven't built yet. When the external good arrives before the internal capacity to hold it is developed, the success begins to manage the person rather than the person managing the success.
The success handles you. You just become a passenger in your own victory.
And that lack of control produces intense anxiety, clinging, imposter syndrome, and eventually self-sabotage. Because imagine success is safe. It exists entirely in your mind as a pure reward. But real success is a completely new set of demanding physical and social conditions.
So we have this profound inability to hold things at their actual scale, whether it's a vast unconditional love, a large sum of money, or a massive career leap. To truly understand this inability to hold scale, the sources insist that we have to look outside of psychology entirely.
Yes.
We have to look at the science of systems and machines. We have to introduce cybernetics.
To understand human behavior here, we really have to look at how machines and systems regulate themselves. We're moving into a framework the sources call systems archaeology, drawing heavily on the foundations of cybernetics.
Now, whenever I hear the word cybernetics, my mind instantly goes straight to science fiction. Cyborgs, artificial intelligence, dystopian futures. But the actual origin of the field is deeply grounded in physical engineering, right?
Completely grounded in engineering and mathematics. The field was largely formalized by Norbert Wiener in the 1940s. During World War II, Wiener was working on anti-aircraft guns, trying to figure out how to shoot down enemy planes.
Okay.
The problem was that by the time you fired the shell at where the plane had already moved. Wiener realized that to hit the target, the system needed to predict where the plane was going to be based on its past behavior.
Oh, wow. So it had to create a predictive feedback loop.
Exactly. Cybernetics fundamentally is the study of control, communication, and regulation in systems. Whether that system is an anti-aircraft gun, a thermostat, a biological cell, or a human family, it's all about how systems use feedback from their environment to regulate themselves and maintain a stable baseline.
But the focal point for understanding our condition capacity mismatch comes from another pioneer of cybernetics, right? W. Ross Ashby.
Yes, Ashby, and his concept known as the law of requisite variety.
The law of requisite variety, that sounds incredibly academic. What is the actual mechanism there?
The mechanism is profound in its simplicity. Ashby's law states that for a regulator to successfully control a system, the regulator must possess at least as much internal variety in its responses as the variety of disturbances it faces from the environment.
So the complexity of the controller has to match the complexity of the problem. Can you give me a mechanical example of that?
Let's look at an airplane. The airplane is the system. The environment, the sky, is going to throw a massive variety of disturbances at that system. Crosswinds, sudden drops in air pressure, turbulence, bird strikes.
Right.
The pilot, using the flight controls, is the regulator. For the plane to survive, the flight controls must have enough different possible movements, pitch, yaw, roll, thrust to counter every possible disturbance the sky throws at them.
Okay, I see. So if the sky throws a complex, multi-directional crosswind at the plane, and the pilot's controls only allow the plane to move straight up or straight down, the system fails. The plane crashes.
Because the regulator lacked requisite variety. It did not have the internal complexity to handle the external condition. Now, apply this strictly mechanical law to human beings. The sources introduce this brilliant, devastating metaphor to explain how requisite variety is formed in humans. The inherited ruler.
A ruler, like a literal wooden measuring stick.
Yes. Think of early childhood development through this cybernetic lens. A parent is the first ruler in a child's life in two distinct ways. First, they literally rule the child's environment. They set the laws, the boundaries, the access to food, the sleep schedules.
Right.
But second, and far more importantly for our adult lives, they hand the child the actual measuring instrument, the ruler by which the child will measure all of reality for the rest of their life.
They install the regulatory instrument.
Before the child even has the language to understand what's happening, this ruler is calibrated. The ruler dictates what counts as safety, what counts as danger, what love is supposed to look like, what anger means, what money signifies.
So if my parents panicked and screamed at each other every time a bill arrived in the mail, the measuring stick I was handed measures money purely in units of panic, urgency, and relational threat.
Exactly. And that ruler becomes your primary regulator. Now, we arrive at the core cybernetic crisis. What happens when a person walks into adulthood and their internal ruler is simply too small for the environment they find themselves in? What happens when the scale of the incoming reality far exceeds the scale of the inherited measuring stick?
Ashby's law kicks in. The incoming reality has more variety than the regulator can handle. The system is threatened with a crash. So how does the human nervous system prevent the crash?
By forcibly attempting to regain control. And it does this by actively reducing the environment to a familiar scale. The system cannot expand its ruler in real time, so it shrinks reality to fit the ruler it has.
Let's track that practically. How does that explain the person who blows the $30,000 inheritance?
Well, a person whose financial ruler was calibrated purely by scarcity, who only knows how to measure weekly survival, cannot measure a $30,000 long-term asset. They literally do not have the internal regulatory variety to manage a multi-decade financial strategy.
The scale is just terrifyingly unmanageable.
So what does the system do to survive? It fragments the unmanageable whole. The $30,000 windfall is unconsciously chopped up into 30 panicked, immediate $1,000 decisions.
Because they know exactly how to handle a $1,000 problem. They are experts at navigating a $1,000 crisis. They just don't know how to navigate a $30,000 opportunity.
They reduce the unmanageable scale of wealth into familiar units of control and depletion. And we see the exact same isomorphic pattern in romantic relationships.
Right, an adult is offered a vast, steady, unconditionally loving partnership. A beautiful, complex system of mutual trust.
But their inherited relational ruler only goes up to the size of conditional, anxious attachment. They cannot measure the vastness of safe love. It breaks their cybernetic scale. So what do? They shrink the adult love down into familiar, small units they can control.
Oh, wow.
They reduce the vastness of trust into small, manageable units of jealousy. They demand constant text messages. They manufacture small arguments. They fragment the relationship into tiny, familiar pieces of conflict.
Because surviving a small argument feels deeply familiar and controllable. So what does this all mean? It's like trying to measure the distance between two cities, let's say New York and Los Angeles, using a 12-inch plastic ruler.
Oh, I love this analogy.
You physically cannot do it. The tool is wildly inadequate for the task. So instead of admitting that your tool is useless and throwing it away, you just stubbornly declare that Los Angeles is only 12 inches away. You shrink reality to fit your tool.
You distort reality to maintain the illusion of control. And what is so vital to understand here is that this reduction, the shrinking of reality, is the root cause of so many of our most destructive human behaviors. But, and this brings us back to the profound relief we promised at the beginning, when you view your behavior through this cybernetic lens, it's no longer a moral failing.
You aren't sabotaging the relationship because you're fundamentally a bad, toxic person who hates happiness.
Yeah.
You're shrinking the relationship because your cybernetic system is desperately trying to avoid a catastrophic failure of regulation. You were just a thermostat trying to cool down a room that is on fire.
Yes. The system says, I don't know how to hold this entire structure without collapsing, so I'll break it into pieces I know how to carry. The relief comes when you realize that self-sabotage is just a lack of requisite variety.
It changes everything. It completely shifts how you view your own history and your own mistakes. But this raises another critical angle. We've been talking heavily about what happens when the ruler is too small to measure the good, when trauma or scarcity builds a tiny ruler. But what happens when the ruler is only used to measuring the good? What happens to the people who have never known scarcity? Because the sources are very clear that this cybernetic framework applies to everyone regardless of privilege.
And it absolutely applies to everyone. In some ways, the consequences of this other extreme are far more insidious on a societal level. This brings us to the phenomenon of the invisibility of the familiar. If your nervous system is formed entirely by safety, wealth, and reliable love, the resources you're given become entirely invisible to you.
So we're talking about people who inherited a massive, expansive ruler from birth.
Yes. When peace and abundance are all you've ever known, you take them as obvious, universal common sense. You assume your baseline is the normal human baseline. You assume your ruler is the only ruler that exists in the world.
And if you assume your baseline is normal, you are going to be deeply confused and likely highly judgmental of anyone whose system operates differently.
To map the mechanics of this, the sources bring in sociology, specifically the foundational work of Pierre Bourdieu, a French sociologist who developed a concept called habitus.
Let's spell that out for you listening. Habitus, Habitus. What is it mechanically?
Habitus refers to the deeply ingrained habits, skills, and dispositions that we possess due to our life experiences, specifically our social and economic class. Bourdieu argued that our social world doesn't just give us ideas, it becomes embodied as pure physical instinct. He called it a bodily hexis.
A bodily hexis.
It dictates your physical posture, your linguistic codes, what feels tasteful, what feels awkward, and most importantly, what feels naturally deserved.
It's the water the fish is swimming in. The fish doesn't know it's wet, it just knows how to swim.
And if you're a fish swimming in the crystal clear water of high social class, your habitus dictates that institutions, schools, banks, police, hospitals exist to serve and protect you. You expect to be heard when you speak. You expect a safety net if you fall. That expectation isn't a conscious thought. It's held in the muscles and the nervous system.
And the danger of this invisibility is stark. The sources cite studies on social class and empathy, showing how this invisible habitus affects how we view others. There is actual data showing that higher social class cues, how someone dresses, their accent, their implicit confidence, actually influence judgments of their competence and humanity.
Right.
Meanwhile, those same higher class individuals sometimes demonstrate a lowered attention or empathy toward the suffering of others.
Because if you have never experienced the cognitive tax of poverty, if you've never experienced Shafir's tunneling effect, you look at someone struggling with money, and you do not see a system failure. You do not see a lack of requisite variety.
You just see a personal moral failure.
You measure their life using your ruler. And your ruler says, well, when I need money, I simply call my parents, or I dip into my robust savings, or I leverage my pristine credit score, or utilize my alumni network. If you don't see the structural support holding you up, you assume your success is purely the result of your own inherent superiority and discipline.
The sources have a phenomenal phrase for this structural support. They call it the hidden scaffolding. And I eagerly want to list what this scaffolding actually looks like, because it goes far beyond just getting a trust fund.
It's everywhere.
It's the subtle, everyday infrastructure of a life. It includes things like ordinary, predictable family dinners where nobody is screaming, safe neighborhoods where you don't have to map out threat routes walking home from school, inherited linguistic codes that tell a teacher or a boss that you belong there, early installed confidence, financial fallbacks, institutional networks, and just the sheer unquantifiable luck of timing.
It's an invisible architecture that holds a person up, allowing them to exert their effort effectively.
Okay, I'm tracking with all of this, but wait, I have to push back here on behalf of the listener who might be feeling a bit defensive right now. Because if we say it's all just hidden scaffolding and inherited capacity, doesn't that unfairly invalidate the very real blood, sweat, and tears of successful people?
That's a very fair question.
I mean, if I work 80 hours a week, sacrifice my weekends, and build a business from the ground up, and my neighbor decides to play video games all day, is this framework telling me my success is just scaffolding? Do successful people not deserve their success? Because that feels like a slap in the face to personal agency.
That pushback is absolutely necessary, and it highlights a crucial nuance in the framework. The expert synthesis here is not to strip away the reality of hard work. The 80 hours a week are real. The discipline is real. The risk, the exhaustion, the late nights, that effort is undeniably real and necessary for success. The framework is not saying you didn't do the work.
So where's the disconnect?
The disconnect happens when the unmeasured scaffolding fuses with the person's identity, creating what the sources call the myth of the self-made success. The myth isn't that you worked hard. The myth is that you did it in a vacuum. The myth is the belief that your hard work was the only variable in the equation.
The successful person uses a small ruler that only measures their personal effort, their personal late nights, while entirely ignoring the massive structural support that allowed that effort to actually yield results.
Exactly. They say, I succeeded because I worked harder than everyone else. That statement contains a partial truth. The work is real, but it becomes a dangerous systemic falsehood when it refuses to measure the environment around the achievement. The 80-hour workweek only builds a business if you have the hidden scaffolding of a stable economy, a biological capacity to handle stress without breaking down, the implicit social trust of investors, and the absence of a catastrophic health crisis.
Because if I truly believe I am 100% self-made in a vacuum, then logically, mathematically, I must believe that everyone who is failing is 100% self-destroyed. If my success is purely my own doing, their poverty must be purely their own doing.
And that is where the unmeasured success becomes a hidden, punishing law. It leads to the harsh, arrogant judgment of anyone who lacks that same scaffolding. The person who inherited a massive capacity for reliable love judges the anxiously attached person as being needy or immature, completely failing to measure the brutal childhood trauma that forged that anxiety.
Right.
The person who inherited generational stability judges the person trapped in poverty as lazy, failing to measure the devastating cognitive tax of scarcity.
There's a quote from the sources that perfectly captures the tragedy of this. It says, formation becomes perspective, perspective becomes judgment, and judgment forgets formation. We forget how we were made, and then we judge everyone else for not being made the same way.
It is the root of a tremendous amount of social cruelty and political dysfunction. The political and social danger here is mismeasurement at a massive systemic scale. If a CEO, a policymaker, or a judge measures the world exclusively through the myth of the self-made success, their policies and rulings will inherently punish the vulnerable for failing to use a ruler they were never given.
So we are caught in this incredible bind. Whether our internal ruler is too small to accept the good things in our own life, causing us to self-sabotage, or our ruler is too small to see our own massive privilege, causing us to judge others. The result is deep systemic pain. It's pain inflicted inward or pain inflicted outward. So how do we get a bigger ruler? If we're all running around with these inherited faulty measuring sticks, how do we actually change the hardware?
To upgrade the hardware, we have to move into a higher level of systems thinking. We have to move from first-order cybernetics into what the field calls second-order cybernetics.
Okay, second-order cybernetics. Walk me through the mechanics of that shift.
In first-order cybernetics, the observer is standing outside the system, simply watching it operate. You're the engineer looking at the thermostat on the wall, noting how it responds to the temperature in the room. You're analyzing the system from a distance.
But in second-order cybernetics,
In second-order cybernetics, the observer realizes they are standing inside the room. They enter the system. The framework shifts from the cybernetics of observed systems to the cybernetics of observing systems.
oh, that's a big shift.
The question fundamentally changes. It is no longer just what is being measured by this ruler. The question becomes, who is measuring with what ruler and how did that ruler form?
We have to stop looking through the lens and start looking at the lens itself.
Precisely. To explore the depth of this, the sources bring in the work of Gregory Bateson, a profoundly influential thinker who wove together psychology, anthropology, and cybernetics. Bateson was deeply interested in how systems process information and learn. He's famous for his definition of information, which he called a difference which makes a difference.
A difference, which makes a difference. Let's ground that. What does that mean in the context of our human measuring sticks?
Well, think about a physical ruler again. A ruler is simply a tool for detecting meaningful differences in physical space. It has millimeter marks, centimeter marks, inch marks. Because of those markings, it allows you to detect the difference between a block of wood that's 10 centimeters long and one that's 11 centimeters long. It can process that difference.
But if you use a ruler that only has markings every 10 inches, you literally cannot detect a 1-inch difference. The information is invisible to the tool.
Apply that to the psyche. If your internal, inherited ruler does not have the sophisticated neural markings to detect the subtle difference between safe intimacy and unsafe intimacy, because you were never taught that difference in childhood, then to your nervous system, all intimacy just looks like a threat.
Wow.
The subtle difference between a partner who is quietly thinking and a partner who is angrily ignoring you cannot be measured. There is no difference that makes a difference.
Because the psychological ruler lacks the resolution. It's like trying to watch a 4K movie on an old black and white television set. The data is hitting the screen, but the screen lacks the pixels to display the nuance.
That is an excellent analogy. Growth, then, what Bateson might call systems literacy, is the agonizing but liberating process of increasing the resolution of your screen. It is the ability to finally step back and examine your own measuring instrument. And again, the profound relief of this second-order framework is that it permanently short-circuits the endless loop of self-blame. Fear, anxiety, self-sabotage, imposter syndrome, relational volatility, these are no longer viewed as moral failings, character defects, or signs of a fundamentally toxic personality.
They're just a lack of resolution on the ruler. They are mechanical errors in the system.
They are mechanical errors based on outdated data, and understanding this leads to a really fascinating extrapolation in the sources regarding a concept that gets thrown around a lot in popular culture: reparenting. We hear about reparenting your inner child all the time, usually framed as giving yourself a bubble bath or speaking kindly to yourself in the mirror.
Which is nice, but it feels a bit sentimental. It doesn't sound like it has the weight to rewrite epigenetic markers.
Because true reparenting is not just sentimental self-soothing. The sources frame it as rigorous cybernetic self-revision.
Cybernetic self-revision. That sounds like you're literally going into the command line of your own source code and rewriting the parameters.
It is the act of the system. Your conscious adult self-observing its own inherited measuring instrument and actively modifying the hardware. It is looking at the tiny, frantic 12-inch plastic ruler you were handed in childhood and saying, "This tool was highly effective. It kept me alive when I was 8 years old in a chaotic house. I honor it for keeping me safe." But it is entirely structurally insufficient for measuring the vast, complex adult life I am trying to build today.
It goes back to the autoimmune analogy. It's the moment you realize your immune system isn't attacking the relationship because the relationship is bad. It's attacking because your immune system is confused. You realize, oh, this pollen isn't a virus. I don't need to mount a defense.
Right.
You observe the mechanism, and in doing so, you slowly teach the system to stand down. It's like realizing you've been wearing red-tinted glasses your whole life. Suddenly, you don't hate the world for being red. You just take the glasses off and finally see the actual colors. It's not a character flaw you have to repent of. It was just the lens. A biological miscalculation you have to recalibrate.
You recalibrate the lens, and the sources argue that this recalibration is the definition of true spiritual maturity. It is the continuous, lifelong process of expanding the ruler until the self can measure more and more of reality without shrinking it. You stop shrinking reality into ego, you stop shrinking it into fear or bias or rigid dogma just to make it fit your comfort zone.
Wisdom is simply the capacity to measure reality at the exact scale at which it operates, without flinching and without forcing it to be smaller than it is.
Yes. When we systematically acknowledge what formed us, what didn't form us, what historical traumas we are blindly projecting onto our partners, and what invisible societal scaffolding quietly holds up our achievements. When we measure all of that accurately, we finally step out of the shadows. We stop being ruled by our hidden history.
Let's take a breath and recap this immense journey, because we have covered a staggering amount of ground in this deep dive. We started by looking at the unflinching biological realities of inherited capacity and intergenerational trauma. The fact that our nervous systems are literally, physically wired by early caregiving and even by the epigenetic trauma of our ancestors to expect specific conditions in the world.
We moved from that biological baseline into the mechanics of the condition capacity mismatch. We explored how, when an unfamiliar good arrives, whether it's the massive bandwidth shift of a financial windfall or the terrifying stability of a safe, loving relationship, our bodies might reject it because we simply haven't been formed to hold it.
We brought in cybernetics and the law of requisite variety to understand our internal rulers. We looked at the ways we desperately shrink reality down to a size we can control, fragmenting opportunities into crises just to feel a sense of familiarity. And we explored the profound societal dangers of the other extreme. The myth of the self-made success, where inherited privilege becomes completely invisible, leading to the arrogant, devastating judgment of those who lack that hidden scaffolding.
And the core takeaway, the vital thread tying all of this biology, sociology, and engineering together, is that profound sense of relief. The relief of knowing that your inability to hold the good things in life isn't a moral failure. It isn't a sign that you are fundamentally broken or unworthy of happiness. It is simply a mismatch of scale. It is a highly effective cybernetic system trying to regulate itself with an outdated, inherited tool.
The system is just confused by the piece. You just have to learn how to update the hardware. The sources leave us with this resonant idea. Whatever has not been measured at its proper scale becomes a hidden law that governs your life. Unmeasured wealth rules a society through blindness and judgment. Unmeasured trauma rules a family through repetition and self-sabotage. So as you go about your week, I want you to look closely at the things that frustrate you most about your own behavior. Look at the exact moment you pushed away someone you care about, or the moment you panicked and froze over a genuinely good opportunity. Ask yourself, what unmeasured history is quietly ruling me right now? What outdated ruler am I using to measure this moment? And what would happen if I finally dared to measure it accurately?